In the summer of 2005, the board of the most powerful chip company on Earth met to discuss an acquisition. The target was a small graphics card maker that most people had never heard of. The price, up to $20 billion. The board looked at the numbers, shook their heads, and said no. Too expensive. Too far from the core business. 19 years later, that little graphics company was worth more than $3 trillion. And the giant that rejected it was thrown out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, replaced on the very same day by the company it refused to buy. This is the story of Intel, the empire that saw the future coming twice and slammed the door both times. To understand how far Intel fell, you have to understand how high it stood. In 1968, two engineers named Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore walked away from their jobs to start something new in a quiet valley of fruit orchards south of San Francisco. Noyce was the co-inventor of the integrated circuit. Moore had already written the law that would define the modern world. Computing power doubles roughly every 2 years. Their third employee was a Hungarian refugee named Andy Grove, a man so intense, so relentlessly paranoid, that he would later write a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. Together, they didn't just found a company, they founded Silicon Valley itself. The silicon in the name is theirs. In 1971, Intel released the 4004, the first commercial microprocessor in history, an entire computer brain etched onto a sliver of silicon smaller than a fingernail. But by the early 80s, Intel was in trouble. Its main business was memory chips, and Japanese manufacturers were flooding the market at prices Intel couldn't match. The company was bleeding. In 1985, Grove turned to Moore and asked a question that would become legend. If the board kicked us out and brought in a new CEO, what would he do? Moore answered, he'd get us out of memories. Grove stared at him and said, then why don't we walk out that door, come back in, and do it ourselves? So they did. Intel abandoned the business it was founded on and bet everything on microprocessors. It was the greatest corporate pivot of the 20th century. IBM had already chosen Intel's chip for its personal computer, and as the PC conquered the world, Intel conquered the PC. Then came the masterstroke. In 1991, Intel put a small swirling logo on the outside of every machine, Intel Inside. A component supplier became a household name. Consumers who couldn't explain what a processor did refused to buy a computer without that sticker. Through the 90s, the Pentium chip made Intel untouchable. Windows plus Intel, Wintel, ran more than 90% of the world's computers. By the year 2000, Intel was worth $500 billion, one of the most valuable companies on the planet. Its factories were the most advanced on Earth. Its margins were the envy of every industry. The paranoid had survived. And then slowly the paranoia died. In 2006, a legendary CEO walked into Intel with an offer. Steve Jobs was building a secret device, and he wanted Intel to make the chip for it. Intel's chief executive, Paul Otellini, ran the numbers. Apple wanted a low price, the volumes were uncertain, the margins looked thin. He said no, the device was the iPhone. Otellini later admitted the forecasts were wrong by a factor of 100. The smartphone became the defining computer of the century. Billions of devices, and not one of them ran on Intel. The mobile revolution was built instead on cheap, power-sipping ARM chips made by rivals in Asia. Intel had turned down the biggest product of its lifetime because the spreadsheet said the margins were too thin. And the wounds kept coming, every one of them self-inflicted. Intel's famous factories, once its greatest weapon, began to stumble. The transition to smaller, faster chips slipped by a year, then 2, then 5. While Intel stalled, a Taiwanese company called TSMC surged ahead, manufacturing better chips for anyone who paid, including AMD. Intel's oldest rival, which came roaring back from the dead and started taking Intel's customers one by one. In 2020 came the public humiliation. Apple dropped Intel from the Mac entirely and built its own chip, one so efficient it embarrassed everything Intel sold. And all the while, that little graphics company from 2005, Nvidia, was quietly becoming the engine of artificial intelligence. When the AI explosion came, every data center on Earth scrambled for Nvidia's chips. Intel, the company that once owned the future of computing, was standing outside the greatest computing boom in history, looking in through the glass. In 2021, Intel turned to a man who had worked there for 30 years, Pat Gelsinger. He came back as CEO, promising to restore the empire, pouring tens of billions into colossal new factories in Arizona and Ohio, backed by billions more from the American government. It was a bold bet. It was also too late. In October 2024, Intel announced the worst quarter in its 56-year history, a loss of $16.6 billion. 1 month later came the sentence. After 25 years, Intel was removed from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Its replacement in the index, Nvidia. The company Intel could have bought for $20 billion was now worth more than 100 Intels. 1 month after that, Gelsinger was gone, forced out by the same kind of impatient board that Grove had once imagined kicking him out. The new leadership began cutting the workforce from 125,000 people toward under 100,000. In the summer of 2026, the layoffs are still rolling through Oregon, thousands at a time, hollowing out the towns that Silicon built. So what actually killed Intel? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing killed Intel. Intel killed Intel. Not Nvidia, not Apple, not TSMC. Every fatal decision was made inside its own boardroom by smart people with perfect spreadsheets. They said no to the iPhone because the margins looked thin. They said no to Nvidia because the price looked high. They protected the fortress of today so carefully that they never built the fortress of tomorrow. That's the pattern, and once you see it everywhere. Dominant companies are almost never murdered. They die of comfort. Success builds margins, margins build caution, and caution, in a technology market, is just death moving slowly. Andy Grove warned them. He wrote it on the wall in plain language. Only the paranoid survive. The moment Intel stopped being paranoid, the countdown began. It just took 20 years for the clock to run out. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe, because on this channel, a new empire falls every week.